how does this impact our life today, like in church life and justice issues, even in this COVID reality we've experienced this year? How has the past impacted what we're living today?
Well, you know, one interesting revelation that came out of COVID for me is that I feel like I escaped from church and I still have Jesus. Because church has never been a comfortable place for me. I mean, I can look around and see brown faces, but we're all accommodating white culture in that church. And so Zoomland just seems to be more inclusive. There's always time for me in Zoomland. You know, there's fewer of those structural distractions that we have in church that you can avoid a lot of relationship by when you're in church with all those all those structures that we put into place in the church that we can hide behind. So that has really been kind of freeing for me, that I can be the church without having to go to church. I don't know. Was there more to that?
No. I think one of the things you're pointing to is like, again, like it's just church life. It's not, you know, it's not merely, as you think about COVID, all the layers of how COVID has impacted disproportionately Native communities and access to health, but you're just saying like, just living life, just going to church, just being in community with other Christians the way that we have had to be during COVID has actually helped me feel freer, because I felt restricted at church. That to me is profound. I mean, I hope you guys are hearing what our sister is saying. Like, to be attending and being in a space where you see people like you, but the structures and systems are restrictive to who you are. It actually reminded me, I was listening to a master's thesis lecture that Jocabed, who's from Panama, was giving yesterday on Memoria Indigena, or Indigenous memory. And she was talking about how, like, you know, when I go to church with my Guna people, like her people, we all read the Bible and we read things because that's how we were taught to do it. But in our tradition, when we pass on important information and history, we do it orally. And so we're actually reading, we're actually engaging in a form of learning that is countercultural to our people, because it was given to us that way. So it reminds me of that example that she gave yesterday. But anything you wanted to add to that, Renee?
Yeah, I think just during this time, I've been given the gift of being able to go back to the, I guess what you would call the liturgical stuff, you know, of what I grew up with, you know, realizing that I can just sit in that silence and understand that I do know who I am, and that, you know, all these voices outside of me were telling me who I was, but or who I should be, or what I should believe. But this time of just being able to sit in that silence, to be able to remind myself who I am, that I know who I am, that I can go outside in the mornings to pray with my cornmeal. Do I have to do it? No, I don't have to, but like I have the freedom to. I can pray with my cornmeal. I can, you know, take part in those ceremonies, the smoke ceremonies and things like that I grew up doing. It's just that there was so much outside influence, just, you know, tells us as Native people like that it's either pagan or that it's somehow evil. And without those, you know, that bombardment of voices, like I was able to just be like, like there are good things that Creator set within us. We have our own origin stories. I have my own origin story. And so even just reading like Genesis 1, you know, that's a Hebrew story, you know, and so just even recognizing that distinction, that like, oh, I do have my own origin story, and I do see how Creator has set his hands in our origin stories, and being affirmed in that, to know that there is that goodness. Even, you know, what we've been told over so many hundreds of years is that we're broken, we're like, you know, all of this. And so but to be able to just affirm that within myself, that like there is goodness. Yeah, so that's been kind of like a gift too, to be able to sit through that
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah, I
practice
really,
that.
I appreciate the time that I've had to spend with my grandkids, you know, time that maybe they would have spent in a Sunday school class, but just seeing the solstice, you know, the solstice is kind of like a spectator sport now, but to be able to take that time and explain to them, you know, you're related to everything that we're looking at. You're related to all parts of creation, even parts of even weather. Those are your relatives. So to be able to do Azalea, to smudge and to pray during the solstice and explain, you know, what's happening. I really have. I don't think I would have taken that much time to do that. Those opportunities just came up during COVID because, you know, we were alone together a lot. So I think there's been a lot of gifts in this, but there's been a lot of tragedy, of course.
Why is it so important to show up as your full self? Why is it so important for you, both as elder and, you know, sister in the community, to show up as your full self? Why not just continue to assimilate?
No, we need a theology of wholeness, not a theology of assimilation. Our body and our spirit, they call for us to be who we were created to be. And for a long time, I lived in the dualism of being native inside, native at home, and then trying to be white in school and in the church. And that makes you crazy. That was before I realized that, you know, Christian mission started out with this imposition of a Euro-cultural template for Christianizing and civilizing natives. But eventually that dualism, it just wasn't, there was religious thinking that was no longer at home in me. The sacred and the secular. I mean, what is sacred in church and can't be sacred in your native culture? I mean, I couldn't talk about the ceremony for picking up an eagle feather in a powwow because that was sacred. But if you say that in church, I learned right away that that's idolatry. You know, and what happens to idolaters? Well, I don't want to burn in hell. So you just learn to keep stuff to yourself. But, you know, there's a lot of, when I went to seminary and Randy was one of my professors, you know, and I learned the difference between a Western worldview and an Indigenous worldview. And I saw that's where a lot of my cultural and theological confusion was coming from, is that it was just two different worldviews. If we could shift and find some balance so that we could share a worldview, but that's not usually what you find in a white church. They're not willing to exegete Genesis 1, bring man down from the pinnacle and have him be an interdependent part of creation. That seems a little too risky. So, but for me to be able to see that for myself, that explained a lot. And so I could just express, and I did not feel and I think Jesus delights when we can express our true self to him the way he made us. And so I gained a lot of freedom going to NAICS, going to that, through that master's program.